The rain fell in sheets across Red Hollow, turning the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Thunder rolled across the prairie like a herd of wild mustangs, and lightning split the gray sky with jagged fingers of white fire. It was a day meant for staying indoors, for keeping close to the hearth, not for weddings, and certainly not for the kind of heartbreak that would unfold in the small wooden church at the edge of town. Isabel Grace Carter stood at the altar in her mother's wedding dress, the ivory silk now darkened with rainwater that leaked through the church's patched roof. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small bouquet of prairie roses she'd picked that morning when the sun still promised a beautiful day. The pews behind her held only a scattering of townspeople. Most had stayed home when the storm rolled in. Those who remained whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes sharp with the kind of interest that fed on others' misfortune. Thomas Whitfield, her intended, stood before her in his Sunday best, his face pale as bleached bone. He'd been shifting his weight from foot to foot for the past 10 minutes, ever since old Mrs. Hutchinson had whispered something in his ear. Now his jaw worked silently, as if chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Thomas, Isabel's voice was soft, barely audible above the rain drumming on the roof. What troubles you? He wouldn't meet her eyes. Instead, he looked past her shoulder to where her stepmother, Margaret, sat rigid in the front pew. Margaret's face was a mask of propriety, but Isabel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her prayer book until her knuckles went white. I can't, Thomas finally said, the words dropping like stones into still water. I can't marry you, Isabel. The church fell silent save for the rain. Even the whispers ceased as every ear strained to hear what would come next. I don't understand, Isabel said, though a cold certainty was already settling in her stomach. She'd seen this coming in the way certain women in town had begun to look at her, in the way conversations stopped when she entered the general store. They say... Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. They say you spent last winter living with a cowhand, in his quarters, alone. The words hung in the air like smoke from a badly tended fire. Isabel's mind raced back to the previous winter when the fever had taken her father, when the bank had threatened to take the farm, when Jake Morrison had offered her work keeping books for the ranch in exchange for room and board. It had been survival. Nothing more. Jake had been a gentleman, sleeping in the barn while she took the small room attached to the main house. But she knew how little truth mattered when gossip took root. Thomas, you know me, she said, reaching for his hand. He pulled back as if her touch might burn him. You know I would never. Do I? His voice cracked, revealing the boy beneath the man he pretended to be. Do I really know you? Isabel, because Samuel Henderson says he saw you coming out of Morrison's quarters at dawn more than once. Says you looked mighty comfortable there. I was working, Isabel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Keeping the ranch books. You know I can cipher better than most men in this town. Mr. Morrison needed help after his accident, and I needed the money to bury my father proper. But Thomas was already backing away, his boots clicking on the wooden floor. I can't take that chance. My family, my reputation, I just can't. He turned and walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the hushed church. The door slammed behind him with a finality that made several women jump. For a moment, Isabel stood frozen at the altar, her bouquet still clutched in her hands. The roses, already wilting from the humidity, dropped petals onto the floor like tears. Then, with a sound like tearing fabric, her stepmother was beside her. You've shamed us, Margaret hissed, her fingers digging into Isabel's arm. All my efforts to find you a decent match, to make something of you after your father left us with nothing but debts. And this is how you repay me. Margaret, please. But her stepmother was already grabbing at the wedding dress, her hands rough with fury. This was my mother's dress. You don't deserve to wear it. Take it off. Here. Isabel looked around at the watching faces, at the barely concealed delight in some of their expressions. Margaret, please, not here. You should have thought of that before you acted like a common woman. Margaret's hands found the delicate buttons at the back of the dress, tearing at them with no care for the antique fabric. Take it off, or I'll tear it off you myself. With shaking fingers, Isabel complied. Stepping out of the dress in the middle of the church aisle, left standing in her chemise and petticoat while the congregation watched. Margaret snatched the dress away, bundling it under her arm. "Don't come home," her stepmother said, her voice cold as winter wind. "I won't have you under my roof another night. You've made your choices, now live with them." She swept down the aisle, leaving Isabel alone at the altar, one by one. The remaining townspeople filed out, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others whispering excitedly about the scandal they'd witnessed. Only Reverend Mills remained, his weathered face creased with something that might have been pity. "Child," he said softly, "you can't stay here. The church is no place for this." Isabel nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. She had no shawl, no coat. Everything had been left at Margaret's house, and she knew better than to try to retrieve them now. "I understand. Reverend—" She walked out into the storm, the rain immediately plastering her thin undergarments to her skin. The streets were nearly empty, but she could see faces in windows, watching her shame. Her feet, still in the delicate wedding slippers she'd saved months to buy, squelched in the mud with each step. Where could she go? She had no family left except Margaret. No close friends the scandal had seen to that. The few coins she'd saved were hidden in her room at Margaret's house, as out of reach now as the moon. The rain drove harder, stinging her skin like needles. She stumbled through the streets, searching for any shelter. The hotel would never take her. Not looking like this, not without money. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Henderson Samuel's mother, so that was out of the question. Finally, on the outskirts of town, she found an old abandoned barn that had once belonged to the Crenshaw family before they'd moved west. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and rain poured through holes in the roof, but it was better than nothing. She crawled into a corner where the hay was still mostly dry, pulling what straw she could find around her for warmth, as night fell and the storm raged on. Isabel Grace Carter curled up in the moldy hay and tried not to think about how quickly a life could unravel. Just that morning, she'd been a bride-to-be with a future mapped out before her. Now she was nothing but another casualty of whispered words and small-town judgment, left to shelter where even the animals no longer came. The thunder rolled on, and somewhere in the darkness, she thought she heard horses approaching, but exhaustion was already pulling her under, and she couldn't be sure if it was real or just the sound of her own heart breaking. The Horseshoe Inn sat at the crossroads of Main and Frontier Street, its weathered boards groaning under the weight of years and storms. Yellow lamplight spilled from its windows, creating pools of warmth in the rain-soaked evening. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, whiskey fumes, and the kind of gossip that could destroy a person faster than any bullet. Samuel Henderson held court near the bar, his voice carrying over the clink of glasses and the scrape of boot heels on wooden floors. "Should have seen her face when Thomas walked out," he said, pausing to take a long pull from his beer. Standing there in her wedding dress like she actually thought he'd go through with it. The men around him laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the comfortable din of the saloon. Old Pete Williams, who ran the feed store, shook his grizzled head. "Can't blame the boy. A man's got to think of his reputation. Marrying a woman who's already been living with another man might as well put a sign on your back saying you're a fool." "Jake Morrison wasn't just any man either," added Frank Dobbs, the telegraph operator. "That cowhand had a reputation for charming women. Probably had her eating out of his hand before her daddy's body was even cold." "Now, Frank," Pete said with mock seriousness, "we don't know for certain what went on in that bunkhouse." "Don't we?" Samuel's eyes glinted with malicious pleasure. "I saw what I saw. Girl coming out at dawn, fixing her hair, looking like she'd just rolled out of bed. You don't need to be a scholar to figure that arithmetic." More laughter rippled through the group. At nearby tables, Other conversations paused as men leaned in to catch the gossip. The abandoned bride was the best entertainment Red Hollow had seen in months. Heard her stepmother threw her out, someone called from across the room. Tore the wedding dress right off her back in the church. Good for Margaret, Samuel said. Woman's got standards. Bad enough she had to take in her husband's daughter after he died. Shouldn't have to harbor a fallen woman, too. Speaking of which, Frank lowered his voice conspiratorially. Anyone seen her since? It's been hours since the wedding, or what was supposed to be a wedding. Who cares? Pete drained his glass and signaled for another. Girl made her bed. Now she's got to lie in it. Though I suppose she's good at that already. The men roared with laughter again, slapping the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. They were so caught up in their mirth that they didn't notice when the saloon door opened, letting in a gust of cold, rain-scented air. Cassian Ward ducked through the doorway, water streaming from his long duster coat. At 6'3", he had to mind the low-hanging oil lamps, and his broad shoulders seemed to fill the entrance. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with premature silver. Though he couldn't have been more than 35, his face was all hard angles and weather-beaten planes, the kind of face that had seen too much of life's harsh side to find much amusing anymore. The laughter died down as men noticed him. Cassian Ward wasn't a man you wanted to cross. He owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties, had built it up from nothing after the war, and was known for both his fair dealings and his unforgiving stance toward those who crossed him. He kept to himself mostly, coming to town only when business demanded it. He walked to the bar with the measured stride of a man who never hurried but always arrived exactly when he meant to. Coffee, he told Jed, the bartender. Black. Coming right up, Mr. Ward. Jed poured from the pot that had been sitting on the stove all day. The coffee thick as tar and twice as bitter. Rough night to be out riding. Had business in Millbrook, Cassian said, accepting the cup. Bridge is washed out. Had to come back through town. He turned, leaning against the bar, and his gray eyes cold as winter slates swept the room. They lingered on Samuel Henderson's group, where the laughter had started up again, though more subdued now. She can sleep in the barn, Samuel was saying, still riding high on whiskey and cruelty. That's what she's used to anyway. Isn't it bedding down with the animals? Maybe Morrison will take her back, Frank suggested. Heard he's working at the Kruger spread now. Might want to keep his little bookkeeper close at hand again. Doubt it, Pete said. Man got what he wanted for free. Why would he pay for it now with a wedding ring? Besides, Samuel continued, warming to his theme. What kind of accommodations does a woman like that deserve? The barn's probably too good for her. Maybe the chicken coop would be more fitting. The men laughed again, but it was an uglier sound now, tinged with the kind of cruelty that came from small men feeling big. They didn't notice Cassian set down his coffee cup with careful precision. They didn't see the way his jaw tightened or how his hands flexed at his sides. You know what the really pathetic part is? Samuel said, his voice loud with drink and spite. She probably thought she was being clever, thought she could trap poor Thomas into marriage before he found out about her little winter arrangement. But you can't hide that kind of shame. It follows you like the stink follows a... He never finished the sentence. Cassian Ward had moved with the sudden violence of a summer storm, closing the distance between the bar and Samuel's table in 3 long strides. But instead of the fight everyone expected, he simply stood there, looking down at the seated men with those cold gray eyes. Funny how brave men get when they're talking about a woman who isn't here to defend herself, he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent saloon. Especially men who've never had to make a hard choice in their lives. Samuel's face flushed red. Now see here, Ward. No. The word was soft but final. I don't think I will see here. I think I've seen enough. He looked at each man at the table in turn, his gaze heavy with disgust. Grown men, sitting in a warm saloon, bellies full of food someone else cooked, clothes someone else mended, passing judgment on a girl who nursed her dying father and tried to keep a roof over their heads. Must make you feel real big. She compromised herself, Pete said, though he couldn't quite meet Cassian's eyes. A decent woman would have found another way. A decent woman, Cassian repeated, his voice flat. Tell me, Pete, when your wife took in washing from the mining camps to help pay your gambling debts 2 years back, was she still a decent woman? Or is it only indecent when there's no man's failure to blame it on? Pete's face went white, then red. The whole saloon knew about his gambling problem, how his wife had worked her fingers raw to keep them from losing their house. But nobody talked about it until now. That's different, he muttered. Is it? Cassian looked around the room, taking in all the watching faces. How many of you have sisters, daughters, wives who've done what they had to do to survive? How many of you have benefited from a woman's sacrifice and then sat in judgment of another for doing the same? The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and accusatory. Men looked into their drinks, at the walls, anywhere but at Cassian Ward's condemning gaze. She can sleep in the barn, Samuel said again, but quietly now, more to salvage his pride than anything else. It's not like anyone's going to take her in, not after today. Cassian studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to the bar. He pulled out his wallet, left money on the scarred wood far more than the coffee cost, and picked up his hat. Where are you going, Ward? Jed asked. Storm's getting worse out there. Cassian settled his hat on his head, his face set in hard lines. Seems someone needs to check the barns around town, make sure no one's sleeping where they shouldn't be. He pushed through the door and disappeared into the storm. The saloon remained quiet for several heartbeats after he left. Then, slowly, conversation resumed, though it was subdued now, lacking the earlier cruel energy. Samuel Henderson stared at the door, his face twisted with embarrassment and anger. Self-righteous bastard, he muttered, but not loud enough for anyone to really hear. He knew, they all knew, that Cassian Ward had just put them in their place without raising a hand or his voice. And worse, he'd been right to do it. Outside, Cassian Ward mounted his horse, a big black gelding that stood steady despite the driving rain. He pulled his coat collar up and turned the horse toward the edge of town, where the old abandoned properties dotted the landscape like broken teeth. If Isabel Carter was out here somewhere, sleeping in a barn because the good people of Red Hollow had decided she wasn't decent enough for a real roof, then by God, he'd find her. The storm howled around him as he rode into the darkness, following a hunch and a pull he couldn't quite name. Behind him, the lights of the Horseshoe Inn glowed weakly through the rain, and the men inside returned to their drinks and their smaller gossip, trying to forget the way Cassian Ward had looked at them like they were the ones who should be ashamed. The rain had turned to ice, each drop a tiny needle against Cassian's face as he searched the abandoned edges of Red Hollow. His horse, Tempest, picked his way carefully through the mud, ears flicking at every sound. They'd already checked the old Merriweather place and the burned-out remains of the stage depot. Nothing but rats and rotting wood. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the sagging outline of the Crenshaw barn ahead. It looked like a broken-backed animal crouching in the storm. Half its roof caved in from last winter's snows. Not much of a shelter, but better than nothing for someone desperate enough. Cassian dismounted, looping Tempest's reins around a fence post that looked marginally more stable than its neighbors. The barn door hung askew, and he had to shoulder it open, the hinges screaming protest. Inside, the air was thick with mold and decay, but underneath it, he caught something else, the faint scent of lavender, incongruous in this place of abandonment. "Hello?" His voice echoed in the darkness. "Anyone here?" No answer but the drum of rain on what remained of the roof. He pulled out his lamp, struck a match, and held it high. Shadows danced across broken stalls and piles of rotted hay. Then, in the far corner, he saw her. Isabel Carter lay curled in a nest of old straw, her body drawn into itself like a child trying to disappear. Her undergarments, soaked through, clung to her trembling form. Her dark hair, which had probably been pinned up prettily for her wedding, now hung in tangled ropes around her face. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that sent alarm racing through him. Cassian crossed the space in 3 strides, setting the lamp aside as he knelt beside her. Her skin was cold as creek water when he touched her shoulder. "Miss Carter, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing fever-bright blue eyes that couldn't quite focus. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I didn't." "Shh." He shrugged out of his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Save your strength." She tried to pull away, some last vestige of propriety making her resist. "You shouldn't. People will say." "People say a lot of things," Cassian replied grimly. "Most of it isn't worth the breath it takes to speak it." He gathered her into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed, like a bird, all hollow bones and fragile spirit. She made one more weak protest before going limp against his chest, her head falling against his shoulder. He could feel the fever heat beginning to build beneath her cold skin, her body's last desperate attempt to fight off the chill that had settled into her bones. Outside, Tempest waited patiently in the rain. Cassian settled Isabel across the saddle, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm firmly around her waist to hold her steady. She mumbled something he couldn't make out, her head lolling back against his chest. The ride back through town seemed endless. The rain had driven most folks indoors, but he could see faces in windows, watching. Let them watch. Let them add this to their collection of gossip. He'd stopped caring what the good people of Red Hollow thought years ago. As they passed the church where she'd been humiliated just hours before, Isabel stirred. "No," she whimpered, trying to turn her face away. "Please, not there, not again." "We're going past it," he assured her, tightening his hold. "You're safe now." But Main Street wasn't done with them yet. A small group had gathered under the awning of Henderson's Mercantile, and Samuel himself stood at the front, his face flushed with more than just whiskey now. Well, he called out as they passed. "Looks like Ward found himself astray after all." Cassian reined Tempest to a stop. The horse stamped, sensing his master's tension. For a long moment, Cassian just looked down at Samuel and his cronies, rain streaming from the brim of his hat. "She's sick," he said finally, his voice cutting through the rain. "Half frozen. A lady in distress. Any decent man would help her." "A lady?" Samuel scoffed. "That's rich. Ladies don't end up sleeping in barns. Ward, you want to take in Thomas Whitfield's leavings. That's your business. But don't expect the rest of us to pretend she's something she's not." Something shifted in Cassian's face then, a hardening that made even Samuel take a step back. When he spoke, his voice was soft, dangerous. "You're right about one thing. Henderson, she's not sleeping in a barn." He shifted Isabel's weight, cradling her more securely against him. She was shivering now, violent tremors that shook her whole body. "She's not a horse," he said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "She doesn't belong in a barn, and any man who thinks otherwise isn't worth the mud on my boots." "Your funeral, Ward," Frank Dobbs called out. "Don't come crying to us when she ruins your reputation like she ruined poor Thomas's." "My reputation," Cassian actually smiled then, a cold curve of lips that held no humor. "I've been called a bastard, a tyrant, and worse. You think I care what a bunch of gossips say about me taking in a sick woman? You think your opinions matter to me at all?" He touched his heels to Tempest's flanks, and the horse moved forward. But then Cassian pulled up again, looking back over his shoulder. "Oh, and Henderson, that barn where you suggested she sleep, I own that land. Bought it from the bank last month. Anyone I find trespassing on it from now on will be dealing with the sheriff. Pass the word." The group scattered like chaff in the wind, suddenly very interested in getting out of the rain. Cassian rode on, feeling a grim satisfaction at their retreat. They were cowards, all of them. Brave enough to destroy a woman's reputation with their whispers, but not brave enough to face a man who called them on it. The Ward Ranch lay 3 miles outside town, a sprawling operation that had started as a homestead claim and grown into an empire. The main house sat on a rise, a 2-story structure of good timber and stone that had weathered storms worse than this. Light glowed warm in the windows. His housekeeper, Maeve, always kept lamps burning when he was out late. He'd barely pulled up to the front porch when the door flew open. Maeve O'Brien stood there, all 5 feet of her, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes taking in the situation at a glance. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, hurrying down the steps despite the rain. "Is that the Carter girl? What's happened to her? Help me get her inside," Cassian said, already dismounting with Isabel in his arms. "She's burning up with fever." Maeve didn't waste time on questions. She led the way through the house, up the stairs to the guest wing. "In here," she said, pushing open the door to the blue room, the best guest chamber with its big feather bed and thick quilts. "Put her down gentle now." Cassian laid Isabel on the bed, stepping back as Maeve immediately took charge. The older woman felt Isabel's forehead, checked her pulse, and made disapproving noises at the state of her wet undergarments. "Get out," she ordered Cassian without looking at him. "Send Rosa up with hot water and clean night clothes, and tell Juan to ride for Dr. Holcomb. This girl's in a bad way." Cassian hesitated at the door. Isabel looked so small in the big bed. Her dark hair spread across the white pillows like spilled ink. Will she be all right? Maeve's expression softened slightly. "If God's willing and we do our part, now go. The longer you stand there gawking, the sicker she gets." He went, calling for the servants, setting the household in motion. Within minutes, Rosa was hurrying upstairs with steaming water and armfuls of clean linen. Juan had saddled a fresh horse and was racing toward town to fetch the doctor. Cassian found himself pacing the study, unable to settle to any task. He'd acted on instinct, bringing her here. The same instinct that had driven him out into the storm to look for her in the first place. He told himself it was just human decency, what any Christian man would do, but he knew that was only partly true. He'd noticed Isabel Carter before, of course. Hard not to in a town the size of Red Hollow. She had a quiet grace about her, a way of holding her head high even when circumstances tried to bow it. He'd seen her nursing her father through his final illness, wearing herself thin but never complaining. He'd watched her work in Henderson's store, quick with figures and patient with difficult customers. And yes, he'd heard the whispers about her time at the Morrison Ranch. But he'd also known Jake Morrison, a decent man who'd broken his leg in a fall and needed help managing his accounts. The idea that Jake would have taken advantage of a grieving girl was ridiculous to anyone who'd actually known him. But in a town like Red Hollow, the truth rarely got in the way of a good scandal. Thunder shook the house, rattling the windows. Cassian moved to stare out at the storm, wondering what would have happened if he hadn't gone looking. Would she have lasted the night in that drafty barn? Would anyone have even looked for her come morning? Mr. Ward. Rosa appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Miss Maeve says to tell you the doctor's here." Dr. Holcomb was a competent man, if given to drink when he thought no one was looking, but his hands were steady as he examined Isabel, and his expression was grave when he finally came downstairs. "Exposure and exhaustion," he said, accepting the whiskey Cassian offered. "She's young and strong, which is in her favor, but she's been through an ordeal, body and spirit. I'd say she needs rest, warmth, and good food. No excitement, no upset." "She'll have whatever she needs," Cassian said firmly. The doctor studied him over his spectacles. "You know what you're doing, taking her in. The whole town's talking about what happened at the church today. Let them talk. It's your reputation, too. Ward, bachelor like you, unmarried woman under your roof." "I have servants," Cassian said coldly. "Mrs. O'Brien is a respectable widow. Rosa lives in... Anyone who wants to make something improper out of an act of charity can answer to me personally. Doctor. Holcomb drained his glass and stood. Just thought you should know what you're up against. I'll be back tomorrow to check on her. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. That girl's had a hard enough time without the town deciding she deserves to freeze to death. After the doctor left, Cassian climbed the stairs to look in on his unexpected guest. Maeve sat beside the bed, knitting needles clicking softly. Isabel lay still, her breathing deep and even. Some color returned to her cheeks. How is she? Sleeping proper now, Maeve said. Poor lamb was half out of her mind with cold and fever. Kept apologizing, saying she didn't mean to be trouble. She's no trouble, Cassian said quietly. Maeve looked up at him, her sharp eyes seeing more than he'd like. No, I don't suppose she is. Not to you, anyway. She returned to her knitting. You go on to bed now. I'll sit with her tonight. But Cassian lingered in the doorway, watching the soft rise and fall of Isabel's breathing. He'd carried her out of that barn, brought her to his home, defied the town's judgment. There would be consequences, he knew, but looking at her now, safe and warm, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. She doesn't belong in a barn, he said again, more to himself than to Maeve. No, the older woman agreed. She surely doesn't. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, painting delicate patterns across the blue wallpaper. Isabel woke slowly, her mind struggling to make sense of her surroundings. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd slept on since her father's death. The quilts smelled of lavender and sunshine, and somewhere nearby, she could hear the gentle clink of china. Memory rushed back like a flood. The church, Thomas's retreating back, Margaret tearing at her dress, the cold barn, and then darkness. No, not just darkness. Strong arms lifting her, a deep voice promising safety, the solid warmth of a chest against her cheek as rain poured down. She sat up too quickly, and the room spun. A gentle hand pressed her back against the pillows. Easy there, lamb. The voice belonged to a woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes behind wire spectacles. You've been proper sick, 3 days with fever, and that's after near freezing to death in that drafty old barn. 3 days. Isabel's voice came out as a croak. The woman, she must be a servant, immediately offered her a glass of water. Aye, 3 days of tossing and turning, calling out for your father. Poor thing. The woman settled back in her chair, picking up her knitting. I'm Maeve O'Brien, housekeeper here at the Ward Ranch. And before you start fretting, you're perfectly safe and proper. I've been with you the whole time, and Rosa, too. The Ward Ranch, Cassian Ward. Isabel felt heat rise in her cheeks as fractured memories surfaced, being carried through town. Voices calling out crude things, and that deep voice cutting through it all. She's not a horse. She doesn't belong in a barn. Mr. Ward, she began, but Maeve waved her quiet. Is out checking the far pastures. Won't be back until evening. Gives us time to get you sorted. She set aside her knitting and studied Isabel with shrewd eyes. Now, I know you're probably thinking all sorts of foolish things about propriety and what you owe and such, so let me set you straight on a few matters. Isabel waited, her hands twisting the edge of the quilt. First, Mr. Ward brought you here because it was the Christian thing to do. Any decent person would have done the same, though precious few in this town seem to qualify as decent these days. Maeve's mouth tightened with disapproval. Second, you've been ill, not entertaining gentlemen callers. Doctor, Holcomb's been by twice to check on you, and he'll vouch for the propriety of your care. But people will talk. People are already talking, Maeve said bluntly. Have been since the moment Mr. Ward carried you through town. But here's the thing about Cassian Ward. He doesn't give 2 figs for gossip. Never has. Man's got a spine made of iron and a heart that's... She paused, seeming to catch herself. Well, that's neither here nor there. Point is, you're welcome here as long as you need shelter. Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. After days of judgment and cruelty, this simple kindness was almost too much to bear. I can't accept charity. I need to work to earn my keep. And you will, when you're well. Maeve stood, smoothing her apron. Mister, Ward can always use another pair of hands, especially ones that are good with figures. Heard you kept books for the Morrison place. You heard about that? Isabel's stomach clenched. Heard all sorts of nonsense, Maeve said crisply. Also heard from Jake Morrison himself when he passed through last month. Said you were the best bookkeeper he'd ever had, sharp as a tack and honest as daylight. Said it was a crying shame what this town did to your reputation over a bunch of lies. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Maeve made soothing noises, pressing a handkerchief into Isabel's hands. There now. Lamb, you've had a time of it, haven't you? But you're safe here, mister. Ward's not the sort to throw a person out based on wagging tongues. A soft knock interrupted them. A young Mexican woman peered around the door, her face bright with curiosity. Miss Maeve, I have the soup. Bring it in, Rosa. Maeve helped Isabel sit up properly, plumping pillows behind her back. This is Rosa, our housemaid. Rosa, Miss Carter's finally awake. Oh, miss, we were so worried. Rosa set the tray across Isabel's lap. You were white as snow when Mr. Ward brought you in, like a ghost, and the way you shook like a leaf in a storm. Rosa, Maeve warned. Sorry, Miss Maeve, but Rosa's eyes sparkled with barely contained excitement. It's just, nothing this interesting has happened since Mr. Ward brought home that wolf cub 3 winters ago. Despite everything, Isabel found herself almost smiling. A wolf cub, half dead and meaner than a rattlesnake, Maeve confirmed. Nursed it back to health, and it still tried to bite him every chance it got. Finally had to let it go when it got big enough. Still see it sometimes. Watching from the tree line. Won't come close, but won't leave entirely either. She gave Isabel a meaningful look. Mr. Ward has a habit of taking in strays. Don't take it personal. The soup was rich and hearty, better than anything Isabel had eaten in months. As she ate, Maeve and Rosa bustled about, changing the water in the pitcher, straightening things that didn't need straightening, their chatter filling the silence. Course, everyone in town's talking, Rosa said, apparently unable to help herself. Mrs. Henderson came by yesterday, pretending she needed to order beef for the mercantile. Really, she just wanted to know if you were here. What did Mr. Ward tell her? Isabel asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Told her his business was his own, and if she wanted beef, she could send her husband like usual. Rosa giggled. You should have seen her face purple as a plum. Rosa, that's enough gossip, Maeve said firmly. Why don't you go see if Juan needs help in the stable? After Rosa left, Maeve turned back to Isabel. Now, Lamb, I've washed and mended your things, but they're not much. Rosa's about your size. She's got some dresses she's outgrown that should do until we can get you proper fitted. I can't. Yes, you can. Maeve's tone brooked no argument. You can't work in your undergarments, and you can't go to town to buy new things, not with how folks are acting. So you'll take what's offered with grace and pay it back when you're able. Isabel swallowed hard. Why are you being so kind to me? Maeve was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling on the cloth she was folding. Maybe because I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn. Maybe because I've been with Mr. Ward for nigh on 10 years and I've learned to trust his judgment about people. Or maybe... She looked directly at Isabel. Maybe because I remember another young woman who got caught up in scandal through no fault of her own. Town turned on her too. She didn't have anyone to stand up for her, and she ended up... She shook her head. Well, that's old history. Point is, you've got people here who won't judge you based on lies and gossip. That's rare in this world. Don't be too proud to accept it. The afternoon wore on. and Isabel found herself drifting in and out of sleep. Once, she woke to find Dr. Holcomb checking her pulse, his whiskey-scented breath not quite masked by peppermint. "Good, good," he muttered. "Fever's broken properly. Another day or two of rest and you'll be right as rain." As the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of gold and orange, Isabel heard the sound of horses in the yard, heavy footsteps on the porch, the low rumble of masculine voices, and then boots on the stairs. Her heart began to race. She hadn't seen Cassian Ward properly since she was too fevered to remember clearly. A knock on the door, and then he was there, filling the doorframe. He'd cleaned up from his day's work, but dust still clung to his boots and his hair was slightly mussed. In the dying light, she could see him clearly for the first time, the strong jaw, the weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun, those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through a person. "Miss Carter." He removed his hat, holding it in hands that looked like they could break stones or gentle wild horses with equal ease. "I'm glad to see you're recovering." "Mr. Ward." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I owe you." "You owe me nothing." His tone was firm but not unkind. "You were in need. I helped. That's the end of it." "But your reputation—" "My reputation was never based on the good opinion of gossips and fools." He stepped into the room, though he maintained a proper distance. "I built what I have with my own hands, my own sweat. No amount of talk can take that away." "They're saying terrible things," she said, needing him to understand the full weight of what he'd taken on. "About you, about why you brought me here." "I know what they're saying." His expression darkened. "They said similar things when I hired Chen Lu to cook for the ranch hands, when I let the Mexican family stay on their land instead of driving them out, when I refused to join their lynch mob 2 summers ago. I'm used to being the villain in their small stories." He moved to the window, looking out at his land. "Miss Carter, I won't lie to you. Having you here will cause talk, but sending you away would say their gossip matters to me. It doesn't. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. When you're well, if you want to work for your keep, I can use someone good with numbers. The ranch books are a mess, and I've never had the patience for that kind of detail." "You don't even know if I can do the work," Isabel said, though hope was beginning to bloom in her chest. He turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Jake Morrison doesn't give praise lightly. If he says you're the best bookkeeper he's had, that's good enough for me." The smile faded. "But don't feel obligated. If you'd rather leave once you're well, I'll arrange safe passage wherever you want to go." "I have nowhere to go," she admitted quietly. "No family but my stepmother," and she made her feelings clear. "No money, no friends who'll acknowledge me now." "Then you'll stay." He said it simply, as if it were already decided. "Maeve will see you have what you need. Rest now. There's no rush to decide anything." He turned to go, but Isabel called him back. "Mr. Ward, why did you come looking for me that night?" He paused at the door, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the hallway light. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without turning, "Because someone should have. Because letting you sleep in a barn would have made me no better than the men mocking you in that saloon. And because—" He did turn then, his gray eyes meeting hers across the room. "Because I've been where you are, alone, judged, with nowhere to turn. I was lucky someone reached out a hand. Seemed only right to do the same." He left before she could respond, his footsteps fading down the hall. Isabel sank back against the pillows, her mind whirling. She'd been prepared for charity, for pity, even for expectations she couldn't meet. She hadn't been prepared for simple human decency, for matter-of-fact kindness that asked nothing in return. Outside, night was falling over the ranch, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear cattle lowing. It was a peaceful sound, so different from the harsh whispers and cruel laughter of town. for the first time since her father died. Isabel felt something that might have been safety. She was still a woman with a ruined reputation, still had nothing to her name but the kindness of strangers. But here, in this room with its blue walls and soft quilts, with people who judged her by her actions rather than gossip, she could begin to believe that might be enough. The morning air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of sage and cattle across the ranch. Isabel stood at the fence line, watching Cassian work with a young stallion in the corral. It had been 2 weeks since she'd recovered enough to leave her room, and in that time, she'd fallen into a rhythm that felt both foreign and comforting. "Hold the rope steady," Cassian called to Juan, his foreman. "Let him feel the pressure, but don't force it." The stallion, a beautiful bay with a white blaze down his nose, pranced nervously at the end of the lead, his eyes rolling, but Cassian just stood there, patient as stone, until the horse finally stopped fighting and took a tentative step forward. "That's it," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. "No one's going to hurt you here." Isabel found herself leaning against the fence, mesmerized. There was something about the way he handled the animals, firm but never harsh, demanding respect while offering trust in return. It was so different from the brutal breaking methods she'd seen other ranchers use. "He has a way with them." Maeve appeared beside her, carrying a basket of laundry. "Always has. Says you can't build anything lasting on fear." "He's very patient," Isabel observed, watching as Cassian slowly approached the stallion, hand extended. Maeve's expression was knowing. Patient with most creatures that need it, less so with fools and liars. But then, who has time for those? The stallion finally allowed Cassian to touch his neck, and a small smile crossed the rancher's face. It transformed him, softening the harsh angles, making him look younger. He glanced up and caught sight of Isabel watching. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the dusty corral. Then he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before turning back to his work. "Come on," Maeve said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Those books won't sort themselves, and you promised to help me figure out why the household accounts don't match." The ranch office was a small room off the main house, cluttered with ledgers, receipts, and correspondence dating back years. Isabel had been horrified when she first saw it, papers stuffed in drawers, calculations scrawled on scraps and envelopes, no system to speak of. "Mr. Ward's brilliant with cattle and land," Maeve had explained, "but paperwork makes him want to throw things. Usually does, which is why everything's such a mess." Now? Isabel sat at the large oak desk, carefully transcribing numbers from a water-stained ledger into a fresh book. The work was familiar, soothing even. Numbers didn't lie or gossip. They didn't judge. They simply were what they were. And bringing order to chaos gave her a sense of purpose she'd been missing. "Find anything interesting?" Cassian's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, dust still clinging to his clothes. "You've been paying too much for grain," she said, recovering her composure. "Henderson's been overcharging you by nearly 20% compared to what he charges other ranches." His expression darkened. "Has he now?" "I compared your receipts with the published prices in the Cattleman's Journal. Also," she hesitated, then forged ahead. "You've been giving credit to several families in town who haven't paid you back in over a year. The widower Johnson, the Clearys, Mrs. Abernathy." "Those families have had hard times," he said, moving into the room. "Johnson lost his wife. The Clearys had their crop fail, and Mrs. Abernathy's trying to raise 3 grandchildren on her own." "I'm not criticizing," Isabel said quickly. "I just thought you should know the total. It's substantial." He came around the desk to look at her figures, and she caught the scent of leather and sunshine that clung to him. "Let them be," he said after a moment. "Write them off as gifts if it makes the book's balance better. No point hounding people who have nothing to give." "That's very generous of you." He shrugged. It's just good business. A desperate man might steal. A grateful man remembers who helped him when times were hard. Besides, his mouth quirked. What good is success if you can't use it to help folks who need it? Their eyes met, and Isabel felt heat rise in her cheeks. She knew he was talking about more than just the townspeople's debts. A commotion outside broke the moment. Horses in the yard, voices raised in greeting. Cassian frowned and went to the window. "Damn," he muttered. "That's Judge Morrison and his wife. What are they doing here?" Isabel felt her stomach drop. Judge Morrison was Thomas Whitfield's uncle, and his wife was one of the biggest gossips in 3 counties. If they were here, "I should go," she said, starting to rise, but Cassian put a hand on her shoulder. "You'll do no such thing. This is my house, and you're my employee. You have every right to be here." He straightened his vest, his face setting into hard lines. "Besides, might as well face them now as later. News of you working here has already reached town." He strode out, and, after a moment's hesitation, Isabel followed. She found the Morrisons in the front parlor, the judge red-faced and blustering while his wife perched on the edge of a chair like a bird of prey. "Absolutely scandalous, Mrs." Morrison was saying. "Cassian, what were you thinking the girl's reputation is in tatters? And now you're dragging yours down with it." "Good afternoon to you too, Agatha," Cassian said dryly. "Judge, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Judge Morrison puffed up importantly. "We're here on behalf of the town council. Cassian, this situation cannot continue. Having that woman under your roof, unchaperoned. Mrs. O'Brien lives in, as does Rosa and several of the hands." Cassian interrupted. "Miss Carter is properly chaperoned at all times. She's also earning her keep by bringing order to my accounts, which frankly needed it." "But the impropriety, Mrs." Morrison's voice rose to a near shriek. "People are talking." "People are always talking," Cassian said. "Funny how they never talk about anything worthwhile. Like how Judge Morrison here foreclosed on 3 families last month, putting children out of their homes. Or how Henderson's been watering his whiskey and overcharging for grain. No, they'd rather talk about a young woman who had the audacity to work for her survival." "Now see here," the judge started, but his wife wasn't finished. "That girl lived with a man unmarried for months, and now she's living with you. What kind of example does that set for the decent young women of our town?" "What kind of example does it set?" Cassian said quietly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "When a town turns its back on one of its own, when good Christian folks would rather see a woman freeze to death than offer her shelter, when gossip matters more than truth." He moved to the window, his back to them. "Jake Morrison broke his leg last winter, could barely walk, let alone manage his ranch. Miss Carter kept his books, cooked his meals, and nursed him back to health. In return, she had a roof over her head and honest wages. That's the truth of it, though I doubt truth matters much to people who'd rather believe the worst." "Even if that's true," Mrs. Morrison said, though she looked slightly less certain. "It doesn't change how it looks. You must see that. Cassian, your mother would be horrified." "My mother," Cassian turned, his eyes flashing, "would be horrified at a town that calls itself Christian while casting stones at a grieving girl who did nothing wrong. She taught me that actions matter more than appearances. I'm living by her teachings, not yours." The judge stood, his face mottled with anger. "You're making a mistake, Ward. The town won't stand for this. There will be consequences." "From who?" Cassian asked mildly. "You'll foreclose on me, good luck with that. I don't owe any bank a cent. You'll refuse to do business with me. I sell my cattle in Denver and Kansas City, not Red Hollow. You'll snub me socially. When have I ever cared about your tea parties and church socials?" He opened the parlor door, a clear dismissal. "Miss Carter stays. She's a good worker, and I need the help. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, I suggest you look elsewhere for your entertainment." The Morrisons left in a huff. Mrs. Morrison muttering about the decline of proper society, while the judge promised vague retributions. Cassian watched them go from the window, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have done that," Isabel said quietly from the doorway. "They'll make trouble for you." He turned to her, and she was surprised to see amusement in his eyes. "Let them try. I've been a thorn in their side for years. This just gives them a new reason to disapprove of me." "But why?" She came into the room, genuinely puzzled. "Why risk your standing in the community for—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "For me" seemed too presumptuous. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Because someone needs to stand up to their small-mindedness. And because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing, when they let gossip and prejudice win. I won't be part of that. Not again." There was a story there. Isabel could sense it. Something in his past that drove him to stand against the tide of public opinion. But this wasn't the time to ask. "Thank you," she said instead, "for defending me, for giving me a chance when no one else would." "You don't need to thank me for doing what's decent." He moved past her toward the door. "But if you really want to show gratitude, you could figure out what Henderson's done with the missing payments from last year's cattle drive. I know that weasel shortchanged me somehow. Just can't prove it." Despite everything, Isabel found herself smiling. "I'll see what I can find." He paused at the door, looking back. "They'll likely come at you directly next. Try to shame you into leaving. Are you prepared for that?" She thought of the alternatives. No home, no work, nowhere to go. Then she thought of the peace she'd found here, the simple dignity of honest work and fair treatment. "I've survived worse than wagging tongues. Mr. Ward, I won't be driven off by gossip." "Good." He nodded approvingly. "Then let them talk. We've got real work to do." That evening, as Isabel worked late in the office, she heard music drifting from the bunkhouse, one of the hands playing a fiddle, the others singing along to some bawdy trail song. Through the window, she could see Cassian making his final rounds, checking on the horses, talking quietly with Juan about the next day's work. This was a good place, she realized, a place where people were judged by their actions, not rumors, where hard work meant more than social standing, where a ruined woman could find not just shelter, but purpose. The townspeople would come. She knew. They'd whisper and condemn and try to shame her into fleeing. But here, surrounded by ledgers and honest work, with the sound of rough music and the sight of a man who'd stood up for her when no one else would, Isabel felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. She felt like she was home. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by young Billy Patterson, who worked odd jobs around town. Isabel was in the kitchen helping Rosa prepare breakfast when the boy appeared at the back door, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Got a letter for Miss Carter," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "From Reverend Mills." Isabel's hand stilled on the bread she'd been slicing. A letter from the Reverend could mean any number of things, none of them likely to be pleasant. She wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope, noting how Billy stepped back as if her scandal might be contagious. "Thank you, Billy. Would you like some fresh bread and jam?" The boy's eyes darted to the warm loaf, clearly tempted, but then he shook his head. "Ma would tan my hide if she knew I was taking food from— I better go." He scurried off, leaving Isabel standing in the doorway with the letter. Rosa made a disgusted noise behind her. "That boy's mother is Nancy Patterson," she said, "same woman who comes begging at the back door every winter when her husband drinks away their money. But now she's too good to let her boy take bread from you." Isabel turned the letter over in her hands. Part of her wanted to throw it in the stove unread, but curiosity won out. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. The Reverend's spidery handwriting filled the page, and as she read, she felt her knees grow weak. She must have made some sound because Rosa was suddenly beside her, guiding her to a chair. "What is it? What does he say?" He says, Isabel's voice caught. He says he's received information about what really happened, about Thomas and why he left me at the altar. Maeve appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. What information? Isabel read aloud, her voice barely steady. My dear Miss Carter, my conscience compels me to write to you regarding the terrible injustice done to you in my church. I have recently learned from Mrs. Thomas Whitfield, formerly Miss Catherine Bellwether, that her new husband invented the scandal about you to avoid his obligation. It seems he had been courting Miss Bellwether in secret for months and needed an excuse to break your engagement without appearing the villain. That snake, Rosa breathed. That low-down, cowardly snake. Maeve took the letter, reading the rest. Says here that Thomas paid Samuel Henderson to spread the story about you and Jake Morrison. Gave him $20 to make sure everyone in town heard it before the wedding. Her face darkened. And the girl, Catherine, she knew all along. Helped plan it. Even... Isabel felt numb. All the humiliation, the pain, the loss of her home and reputation, all of it orchestrated by the man who'd claimed to love her. Why is he telling me this now? Maeve finished reading. Says Catherine confessed during a fit of conscience. Seems she's with child and feared God's judgment. Wanted the Reverend to make amends on her behalf. She snorted. Convenient conscience, only working after she got what she wanted. Does he say anything about telling others, setting the record straight? Maeve's silence was answer enough. Isabel took the letter back, scanning to the end. There it was, in the Reverend's careful script. While I deeply regret the wrong done to you, I fear making this public now would only cause more harm to innocent parties. Mrs. Whitfield is in a delicate condition, and the scandal would destroy the new family. I pray you will find it in your heart to forgive, as our Lord commands. Forgive. Isabel crushed the letter in her fist. He wants me to forgive they destroyed my life, and I'm supposed to quietly forgive so they can keep their reputation. The nerve of that man. Maeve said, sitting in his comfortable house, preaching about forgiveness while you nearly froze to death because of their lies. Isabel stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. She fled the kitchen, the letter still clutched in her hand. Outside, the morning sun was bright, almost mockingly cheerful. She walked blindly, not caring where her feet took her, until she found herself at the small cemetery on the hill behind the ranch. Cassian had told her about this place where the original homesteaders were buried, along with ranch hands who'd died with no family to claim them. Simple wooden crosses and stone markers dotted the hillside, surrounded by wildflowers. She sank down beside one of the graves, her skirts spreading around her in the grass. The rage came first, hot and fierce. How dare they? How dare Thomas use her trust against her? How dare Catherine help destroy another woman's life for her own gain? How dare the Reverend ask her to bear this burden in silence? Then came the tears, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her lost innocence, for the life she'd planned, for the father who wasn't there to protect her, for the town that had turned its back so readily. She cried until she had nothing left, until she was empty and hollow as a reed. Miss Carter? She looked up to find Cassian standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. She hadn't heard him approach, but then he moved quietly for such a large man. Maeve told me about the letter, he said simply. Thought I might find you here. I come here sometimes too, she admitted, wiping her face with the back of her hand. When town feels too close. When I need to think. He came closer, studying the graves. Good people here. Honest folks who worked hard and didn't judge. He paused. Unlike some who wrap themselves in righteousness while dealing in lies. Did Maeve tell you what it said, all of it? She did. His jaw tightened. Thomas Whitfield better hope our paths don't cross anytime soon. Man who'd destroy a woman's reputation to cover his own cowardice. Well, let's just say I've got strong feelings about that. The Reverend wants me to forgive and forget, Isabel said bitterly. To protect Thomas's new family, as if my life, my reputation, mean nothing. Cassian was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down beside her, careful to maintain proper distance. You know what I think about forgiveness. She shook her head. I think it's like trust. Can't be demanded, only earned. And some folks never earn it. He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. Reverend Mills can preach all he wants about Christian forgiveness, but he's not the one who lost everything. Easy to be generous with other people's pain. What would you do? She asked. If you were me? First, I'd stop thinking of that letter as just about the past. It's evidence, written proof that you were slandered. He looked at her directly. Second, I'd think about what I wanted. Justice, revenge, or just to move forward? I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants everyone to know the truth, to see Thomas exposed for what he is. But what good would it do now the damage is done? People believe what they want to believe. Maybe, but there's power in truth, even delayed. He stood, offering her his hand. Come on, let's go back. Whatever you decide, you shouldn't do it on an empty stomach. Rosa's probably keeping breakfast warm. She accepted his help up, noting how he immediately released her hand once she was steady. Always proper, always careful of her reputation, even now when it hardly seemed to matter. As they walked back, she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. This man who'd taken her in without question, who defended her against the town's judgment, who offered counsel without demanding she follow it. Mr. Ward, why do you keep that cemetery? Most ranchers wouldn't bother with graves for hired hands. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my mother's buried there. She died when I was 12, back when this was just a failing homestead. We couldn't afford a plot in town, and truth be told, she wouldn't have wanted to lie among folks who looked down on her for marrying beneath her station. He gestured to the graves. She's in good company now. Honest folk who worked hard and helped build something lasting, better than any marble monument in town. They reached the house to find Maeve in a state of controlled fury. She'd set the letter on the kitchen table and was kneading bread dough with enough force to stun a bull. That mealy-mouthed hypocrite, she muttered, punching the dough. Asking you to suffer in silence so that scheming couple can play happy family, and him a man of God. Maeve, Cassian said mildly, you're going to beat that bread to death. She paused, flour up to her elbows. Good. I'm imagining it's Thomas Whitfield's face. Despite everything, Isabel found herself almost smiling. I don't know what to do with it. Part of me wants to burn it. Part of me wants to nail it to the church door for everyone to see. Whatever you decide, Cassian said, pouring himself coffee. You don't have to decide today. That letter's not going anywhere. Take time to think. But people should know, Maeve started. Should they? Cassian interrupted gently. Or should Miss Carter get to choose what happens with her own story? Isabel felt a rush of gratitude. So many people had made choices for her Thomas. The Reverend, the town. But here was someone saying the choice was hers. She picked up the letter, smoothing out the wrinkles. For now, I just want to work, to do something useful, something real. She looked at Cassian. Those accounts won't sort themselves. He nodded approvingly. Henderson's coming by this afternoon to discuss his grain prices. Might be interesting to have those comparison figures ready. Oh, they'll be ready, Isabel said, feeling a spark of her old self returning, along with a few other interesting discoveries I've made in his billing. That's my girl, Maeve said, then caught herself. I mean, that's the spirit. But as Isabel headed to the office, letter tucked safely in her pocket, she found she didn't mind Maeve's slip, because for the first time since reading those devastating words, she felt like maybe she could be someone's girl again. Not Thomas's discarded bride or the town's scandal, but simply Isabel bookkeeper, truth seeker, and survivor. The letter burned against her side as she walked, its revelations both bitter and liberating. She had proof now, if she wanted to use it. But Cassian was right, she didn't have to decide today. Today, she had work to do, and a grain merchant to expose. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. The Harvest Festival had transformed Red Hollow's main square into a constellation of lanterns and bunting. The scent of apple cider and roasted corn filled the crisp October air, while fiddle music spilled from the makeshift dance floor near the courthouse steps. It was the kind of evening that made even a hard frontier town look magical, when feuds were supposedly set aside and the whole community came together in celebration. Isabel stood before the mirror in her room, smoothing the deep blue dress Rosa had altered for her. It was finer than anything she'd owned before, silk the color of midnight, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Cassian had insisted she have something proper for the festival, though she'd protested the expense. "You've saved me 3 times that amount already by catching Henderson's creative bookkeeping," he'd said, ending the argument. "Consider it a bonus." Now, looking at her reflection, she hardly recognized herself. The past month at the ranch had brought color back to her cheeks and strength back to her bearing. She looked like a respectable woman, not the desperate creature who'd huddled in a barn during a storm. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "The wagon's ready, miss," Rosa called. "Mister, Ward's waiting downstairs." Isabel took a deep breath. She'd been dreading this evening for days, knowing she'd have to face the whole town at once. But Cassian had been firm. Hiding would only fuel more gossip. Better to face them with her head high. She found him in the front hall, adjusting his string tie with the focused frustration of a man more comfortable with ropes than formal wear. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean height. When he looked up and saw her, his hands stilled. "Miss Carter." Something flickered in his gray eyes. "Gone too quickly to name? You look, well, thank you." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up rather nicely yourself. Mr. Ward." Maeve bustled in, wearing her best brown bombazine and a hat decorated with what seemed to be an entire pheasant. "Don't they make a handsome pair?" she said to Rosa, who giggled behind her hand. "Now remember, heads high, both of you. Don't give those gossips the satisfaction of seeing you cowed." The ride to town was quiet, the clip-clop of horses' hooves mixing with distant music. Isabel's hands twisted in her lap until Cassian said quietly, "You don't have to do this, we can turn back." "No." She forced her hands to stillness. "You were right, I can't hide forever, and I won't let them think they've won." As they approached the square, she could see the crowd's families gathered around food stalls, children chasing each other with candied apples, couples moving through the patterns of a country dance. It looked so normal, so welcoming, until they noticed the Ward wagon. The change was subtle at first. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. By the time Cassian helped her down from the wagon, it felt like half the town was watching. "Steady," he murmured, offering his arm. "Remember, you've done nothing wrong." They walked into the square like running a gauntlet. Some people pointedly turned away. Others whispered behind fans and hands. But a few the Widow Johnson, surprisingly, and old Chen Lu from the laundry nodded in greeting. They made it perhaps 20 yards before the first confrontation. Mrs. Morrison, resplendent in purple taffeta, planted herself directly in their path. "Mr. Ward," her voice carried across the square. "I'm surprised to see you here, and with such interesting company." "Mrs. Morrison." Cassian's tone was perfectly polite. "Lovely evening for a festival." "Indeed, though some might say it's an evening for decent folk to gather. Family people. Respectable people." Her eyes raked over Isabel with naked disdain. Not everyone belongs at such gatherings. Isabel felt Cassian tense beside her, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the growing crowd. "Oh, Agatha, still trying to decide who's decent enough for your approval?" Dr. Holcomb appeared, slightly unsteady but smiling broadly. Seems to me Miss Carter here showed more decency nursing her dying father than most folks show in a lifetime. But what do I know? I'm just a drunk old doctor. Mrs. Morrison's face flushed. Doctor, you don't understand the full situation. Don't I? He swayed slightly. I understand that girl there kept Jake Morrison's ranch from falling apart while he was laid up. I understand she worked herself to the bone trying to save her father's farm. And I understand she nearly died in a barn because this town decided she wasn't worth basic Christian charity. She compromised herself, someone called from the crowd. Did she, Doctor? Holcomb wheeled toward the voice. Were you there? Did you see anything improper, or did you just hear it from someone who heard it from someone who made it up wholesale? An uncomfortable murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Isabel stood frozen, aware of every eye upon her. This was worse than she'd imagined. Being defended was almost as mortifying as being condemned. The fact remains. Judge Morrison stepped forward, joining his wife. That certain standards must be maintained. Mr. Ward, surely you see how your arrangement appears to decent society. I see a lot of things, Cassian said, his voice dangerously quiet. I see a young woman who kept books for a ranch to earn honest wages. I see a town that turned its back on her based on lies. And I see people who call themselves decent while acting anything but. How dare you, Mrs. Morrison began, but she was interrupted by a new arrival. Catherine Whitfield, formerly Bellwether, approached slowly, her condition now obvious beneath her shawl. Thomas was nowhere to be seen, but Catherine's face was pale and determined. Mrs. Morrison, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Morrison, I need to say something. The crowd pressed closer. Sensing drama, Catherine's eyes found Isabel's, and something passed between them, guilt, perhaps, or recognition. The things that were said about Miss Carter, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. About her and Mr. Morrison, they weren't, she swallowed hard. They weren't true. The square erupted. Questions, exclamations, demands for explanation. Catherine stood her ground, though she was trembling. Thomas told me they weren't true. He said he needed a reason to break the engagement, that he'd paid to have the story spread. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was part of it. I wanted him, and I didn't care who got hurt, but I can't stand by anymore and watch her be punished for our sins. Mrs. Morrison looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Catherine, dear, you're clearly overwrought. Your condition. My condition is why I'm speaking. Catherine's voice rose. I'm going to have a child. How can I raise it to be good and honest when I've been neither? She looked at Isabel again. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. She turned and pushed through the crowd, leaving chaos in her wake. Some people called after her. Others turned to stare at Isabel with new eyes. The Morrisons looked like they wanted the ground to open beneath them. Cassian's arm was solid beneath Isabel's hand. Would you like to leave? He asked quietly. She almost said yes. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. But then she caught sight of Samuel Henderson hovering at the edge of the crowd, his face pale. He'd taken Thomas's money to spread lies. He'd laughed about her sleeping in barns. No, she said, lifting her chin. I'd like to dance. Cassian's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Then we'll dance. He led her to the dance floor, ignoring the buzzing crowd. The fiddler, after a moment's hesitation, struck up a waltz. Other couples were already there, and after some shuffling and whispers, most stayed. I don't actually know how to waltz very well, Isabel admitted as Cassian took her in his arms. Then we'll fake it, he said, a rare smile touching his lips. I'm not much of a dancer myself. Too much time with horses, not enough with people. They moved through the steps, probably badly. But Isabel didn't care. She was aware of the crowd watching, of the whispers and speculation. But for this moment. She let it all fade. There was only the music, the solid warmth of Cassian's hand at her waist, and the strange feeling that she was exactly where she belonged. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing by me, for making me come tonight, for everything." "You don't need to thank me." His voice was rough. "You've stood on your own 2 feet since the day you arrived. All I did was give you a place to stand." "Still," she looked up at him. This complicated man who'd shown her more kindness than she'd ever expected to find again. "Thank you." The dance ended, but before they could leave the floor, old Hendrik Muller, the German baker, approached with his wife. "Miss Carter," he said in his accented English, "my Greta and we would be honored if you would take some of our apple strudel. Is very good. My Greta's strudel." It was a small gesture, but a public one. Accepting their food, being seen talking with them, was a declaration of sorts. Isabel felt tears prick her eyes. "I would love some strudel," she managed. "Thank you." Others followed the Mullers' lead. Not everyone plenty still kept their distance or whispered behind their hands. But the Clearys stopped to thank her for helping with their account at the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy pressed her hand and whispered that she'd never believed the gossip. Even Reverend Mills approached, looking deeply uncomfortable, to mumble something about Christian forgiveness working both ways. By the time the evening wound down, Isabel felt wrung out but strangely victorious. She hadn't been welcomed back with open arms that would take time, if it ever happened at all. But she'd faced them. She'd danced in the town square with her head high, and Catherine Whitfield had done what the Reverend wouldn't told the truth in public. On the ride home, Maeve dozed in the back of the wagon while Rosa hummed one of the dance tunes. Cassian drove in comfortable silence until they were well out of town. "You did well tonight," he said finally. "Took courage to face them all like that." "I was terrified," she admitted. "When Mrs. Morrison blocked our path, I wanted to run back to the wagon and never leave the ranch again." "But you didn't." "No." She pulled her shawl tighter against the cool night air. "I kept thinking about what you said, that I've done nothing wrong, that truth has power, even delayed." She paused. "Do you think things will change now with Catherine's confession?" "Some minds will change, others won't. People who want to think ill of you will find reasons. Truth or no truth." He glanced at her. "But tonight, you showed them you won't be driven into hiding. That matters." As the ranch came into view, lanterns glowing warm in the windows, Isabel felt the last of the evening's tension leave her. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever the town decided to believe or forgive, she had this honest work, good people, and a man who'd stand beside her against the whole world if necessary. Mr. Ward," she said as he helped her down from the wagon. Would you call me Isabel? At least when we're not in town. Miss Carter feels so formal after everything." He studied her for a long moment in the lantern light. "Only if you'll call me Cassian." Cassian. She tested the name, liking how it felt. "Good night, Cassian." "Good night, Isabel." As she climbed the stairs to her room, she could hear Maeve fussing at Rosa about staying up too late and Cassian checking on the horses one last time. Normal sounds of a normal evening. As if she hadn't just faced down her demons in the town square, as if her world hadn't shifted on its axis. She thought about Catherine's tearful confession, about the townspeople who'd offered small kindnesses, about dancing in Cassian's arms while the whole town watched. Change was coming to Red Hollow. Slow and reluctant, perhaps, but coming nonetheless. And for the first time since that awful day in the church, Isabel Carter believed she might actually survive it. The evening air was cool on the balcony of the main house, carrying the scent of sage and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. Isabel had come out here to escape the warmth of the kitchen, where Maeve and Rosa were putting up the last of the autumn preserves. She found Cassian already there, leaning against the railing with a cup of coffee, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of copper and rose. I didn't mean to intrude, she said, starting to turn back. Stay. He moved over, making room at the railing. It's your home too. The word home still caught her off guard sometimes. 3 months ago, she'd been homeless, desperate, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now she had a room of her own, work that mattered, people who cared about her well-being. It seemed almost too good to trust. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the hands bring in the last of the horses. Then Cassian set down his cup and turned to face her, his expression unusually serious. Isabel, there's something I need to tell you about why I understood what you were going through, why I couldn't let the town's judgment stand. She waited, sensing this was difficult for him. Cassian Ward wasn't a man who shared his past easily. I was engaged once, he said quietly, 8 years ago, to a girl named Margaret Sinclair. She was sunshine itself, daughter of a prosperous rancher. Could have had any man in 3 counties, but for some reason, she chose me. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. I was nobody then, just starting out, working other men's cattle, saving every penny to buy my own land. But Margaret said she didn't care about money or position, said she'd wait for me. Isabel could see where this was going, could read the pain in the rigid line of his shoulders. What happened? Her father happened, and the town gossips. They started saying things that I was after her money, that I'd never amount to anything, that she was throwing herself away on a saddle tramp with big dreams. He laughed bitterly. Her friends whispered in her ear about all the fine gentlemen she could have, about the comfortable life waiting for her if she'd just be sensible. He turned to look at the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. I was away on a cattle drive when it all came to a head, gone for 3 months, earning the money I needed to finally buy this land. When I came back, she was married to William Thornton, safe, respectable, boring William Thornton, who'd never driven cattle through a blizzard or fought off rustlers or built anything with his own hands. Cassian, Isabel reached out instinctively, then caught herself. She came to see me once, after I'd built this place up. Said she was sorry, that she'd been weak, that she'd let other people's voices drown out her own heart. His jaw tightened. I sent her away, told her she'd made her choice. But the truth was, I was too proud, too hurt, too afraid to trust again. He finally looked at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes took her breath away. She died 2 years later. Childbirth. I heard she called for me at the end. But Thornton wouldn't let me near. Said it wouldn't be proper. That's why you came looking for me that night, Isabel said softly. Why you stood up to the town. I couldn't watch it happen again. Couldn't see another person destroyed by gossip and cowardice and the tyranny of what people might say. He turned fully to face her, his voice rough with emotion. But it's more than that now. These past months, having you here, Isabel, He stopped, struggling for words. This man who could gentle wild horses and face down angry mobs seemed suddenly vulnerable, uncertain. I know I'm not what you probably dreamed of, he continued. I'm older, set in my ways. I've got more enemies than friends in town, and I'm not good with pretty words or romantic gestures. But I care for you, more than I expected to, more than I probably should. Isabel's heart was racing. Cassian, you don't have to say anything, he rushed on. I know you've been through too much, that the last thing you need is another man making demands on your heart. I needed you to know that if you could ever see me as more than just the man who gave you shelter. Stop! She placed her hand over his on the railing. Just stop. He fell silent, uncertainty written across his weathered features. Do you know what I see when I look at you? She asked. I see the man who carried me out of a barn when everyone else would have left me there, who gave me work and dignity when the whole town said I deserved neither, who stood beside me at the harvest festival and danced with me in front of everyone. Consequences be damned. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I see the man who treats his workers fairly, who keeps graves for people others would forget, who reads poetry when he thinks no one's looking. His eyes widened. You know about that? Maeve told me. Byron and Wordsworth, hidden in the barn. Despite everything, she smiled. A cowboy who reads romantic poetry. What would the town gossips make of that? Isabel, I'm not finished. She turned to face him fully, her hand still covering his. You say you're not what I dreamed of. Do you know what I dreamed of, a man who'd abandon me at the altar rather than risk his reputation? A life of being small, of fitting into the narrow box this town draws for women, of never mattering beyond being someone's wife or someone's scandal. She felt tears prick her eyes. Then you showed me something different, that a person could build something with their own hands, that strength could be gentle, that integrity mattered more than reputation. You didn't just give me shelter, Cassian. You gave me the chance to discover who I am when I'm not trying to please everyone else. He turned his hand palm up, intertwining their fingers. So what are you saying? I'm saying that I'm not ready for grand declarations or promises of forever. I'm still finding my feet, still becoming whoever I'm meant to be. She squeezed his hand. But I'm also saying that when I think about the future, you're in it, not as my employer or my protector, but as more. I can wait, he said immediately. I'm good at waiting. Waited 8 years already. What's a little longer? She laughed, and it felt like releasing something that had been wound tight inside her. Not too long. I hope I'm not as patient as you are. He smiled then, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. Fair enough. They stood there as darkness settled over the ranch, hands linked, watching the stars emerge one by one. Then Maeve's voice called from inside, If you two are done mooning over each other, supper's ready. Cassian chuckled. That woman has the subtlety of a stampede. She cares about you, Isabel said. About both of us. She told me once that you saved her too. In a way, that she came here after her husband died, when her own family wanted to put her in a home for aged ladies. She saved herself, Cassian corrected. I just offered her a job. Best decision I ever made, even if she does boss me around like I'm still 12. They walked inside together, and if Maeve noticed their linked hands, she had the grace not to comment. But Rosa was less discreet, clapping her hands with delight. Finally, Juan owes me $5. He bet it would take until Christmas for Mr. Ward to speak up. Rosa, Maeve scolded, but she was smiling too. Dinner was a livelier affair than usual, with even the usually taciturn ranch hands picking up on the changed atmosphere. Stories were told, jokes shared, and more than once, Isabel caught Cassian watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. Later, as she helped clear the dishes, Maeve pulled her aside. That's a good man out there, she said quietly. Stubborn as a mule and about as romantic as a fence post sometimes, but good all the way through. He'll do right by you. I know, Isabel said. But Maeve, I need time to be sure of myself. Not just him. Does that make sense? The older woman patted her cheek. Makes perfect sense. Lamb, you've been through the fire. Take time to heal proper before you jump into anything new. He'll wait. Man's been alone this long. He won't perish from waiting a bit more. Out on the porch, Cassian was talking with Juan about moving the herd to winter pasture. But when Isabel stepped out, he broke off mid-sentence. Walk with me, he asked. They strolled toward the corrals, where the horses were settling for the night. The moon was rising, full and bright, turning the landscape into a silver wonderland. I meant what I said, Cassian said. About waiting, but I figure I should court you proper-like, the way I should have handled things from the start. Court me. Isabel couldn't help but smile. How exactly does Cassian Ward court a woman? He actually looked embarrassed. I'm not entirely sure. Been a while since I tried, but I figure I could start by asking if you'd ride out with me tomorrow. There's a place up in the hills I'd like to show you. Pretty spot. Good for thinking. Are you asking me on an outing, Mr. Ward? I'm trying to, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Not doing a very good job of it, apparently. You're doing fine, she assured him. And yes, I'd love to ride out with you tomorrow. They'd reached the corral where the stallion he'd been working with stood watching them with intelligent eyes. The horse, once so fearful and wild, now came to the fence and allowed Cassian to stroke his nose. See, Cassian said softly, sometimes the best things are worth waiting for, worth being patient for. Isabel knew he wasn't just talking about the horse. Sometimes they are, she agreed. As they walked back to the house, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months, maybe years. The future was uncertain. There would still be gossips, still be those who judged her for her past. But she had work she was good at, people who valued her, and now, the promise of something more with a man who'd proven his worth in 100 quiet ways. Cassian, she said as they reached the porch, thank you for telling me about Margaret, for being honest about your feelings, for being willing to wait. He stopped at the foot of the steps, looking up at her. Thank you for not running away when I made a fool of myself with my clumsy declaration. It wasn't clumsy, she said. It was perfect. It was you. She went inside then, aware of him watching her go. Through the window, she could see him standing there for a long moment before heading to his own quarters, and she knew he was smiling. In her room, she found a small wrapped package on her dresser. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note in Cassian's careful script. For your thoughts, figures, or whatever else you want to preserve. See. She held the journal to her chest, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. Tomorrow, she would ride out with him to see his special place in the hills. They would talk, or not talk, and begin the slow dance of courtship. It would be different from her rushed engagement to Thomas Deeper, more honest, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine understanding. For tonight, though, she opened the journal to the first page and began to write, Today, a good man told me I was worth waiting for. The storm came without warning, rolling across the plains like a great black wall. One moment the sky was clear. The next, it was dark as midnight at 3 p.m. The temperature plummeted, and the first fat raindrops quickly turned to sheets of water mixed with hail. Isabel had been in the far pasture, helping Juan and the other hands move the pregnant cows closer to the barn. They'd sensed the weather changing and wanted the vulnerable animals near shelter, but they'd misjudged how fast the storm would hit. Get to the line shack, Juan shouted over the wind, pointing to a small cabin used during roundups. We'll get the rest. But Isabel could see the problem. A dozen calves had gotten separated from their mothers in the chaos, huddled in a depression that was rapidly filling with water. The hands were struggling with the adult cattle, and no one else had noticed the youngsters. Without thinking, she plunged into the growing flood. The water was already knee-deep and rising fast, fed by runoff from the hills. The current tugged at her skirts, trying to pull her downstream. The first calf was easy enough to guide to higher ground, bawling for its mother but following her push. The second and third likewise, but the smallest one, a late-season baby barely 2 months old, was trapped behind a fallen log, water rising around its trembling body. Isabel waded deeper, the water now at her waist. She could hear shouting behind her but couldn't make out the words over the storm's fury. The calf's eyes were wide with terror as it struggled against the log. She reached it just as the real flood hit a wall of muddy water racing down from the hills. It slammed into her like a fist, knocking her off her feet. She grabbed the calf with one arm and the log with the other, holding on desperately as the water tried to tear them both away. Her strength was failing when strong arms encircled her waist. Cassian, soaked to the skin, had tied himself to Tempest's saddle with a rope. The horse, magnificent in his trust, stood firm against the current as Cassian hauled both Isabel and the calf to safety. They collapsed on higher ground, gasping. The calf immediately began bawling for its mother, seemingly none the worse for its adventure. Isabel, however, was shaking uncontrollably, her body finally registering what had nearly happened. "What were you thinking?" Cassian's voice was rough with fear and anger. "You could have been killed." "The calf," she started. "Damn the calf!" He pulled her against him, his arms tight around her. "Do you think any animal is worth your life? Do you think I could bear?" He stopped, his jaw working. She could feel his heart racing against her chest, could feel the tremor in his hands as he held her. This man who faced down wild cattle and wilder men without flinching was shaking because she'd been in danger. "I'm all right," she said softly. "Cassian, I'm all right." "You're not all right. You're reckless and foolish and—" He pulled back to look at her, rain streaming down his face. "And brave. Too brave for your own good." Juan and the others had reached them now, exclaiming over her rescue of the calves. Someone threw a coat around her shoulders, but Cassian's eyes never left her face. "Get her back to the house," he ordered Maeve, who'd appeared with the wagon. "Hot bath, warm clothes, and keep her by the fire until she stops shivering." "I can still help," Isabel protested. "You've helped enough." His tone brooked no argument. "Go with Maeve, now." She went, but not before she saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of fear, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with her near drowning. Back at the house, Maeve fussed over her like a mother hen. "Of all the foolish, headstrong things to do, jumping into floodwater for a calf?" "You'd have done the same," Isabel said through chattering teeth as she sank into the hot bath Maeve had prepared. "Maybe 20 years ago," Maeve admitted. "But I'd have had the sense to tie myself to something first. Lord, when Cassian saw you go into that water—" She shook her head. "Never seen a man move so fast. Threw himself on Tempest bareback, grabbed a rope, and was in that flood before anyone could blink." After her bath, wrapped in warm blankets by the fire, Isabel found herself thinking about that moment, the terror in Cassian's voice, the way he'd held her like she might disappear if he let go. They'd been courting for nearly a month now. Gentle rides, shared meals, quiet conversations on the porch. But this was different. This was raw, unguarded emotion. The storm raged on through the evening. The men came in shifts to dry off and warm up, reporting on damages. Some fencing down, a chicken coop destroyed, but no lives lost, human or animal. Thanks to the quick action, even the calves were safe. Cassian came in last, near midnight. He'd changed into dry clothes, but looked exhausted. His eyes found Isabel immediately where she sat reading by the fire. "You should be in bed," he said. "So should you." She set her book aside. "Maeve saved dinner for you." He shook his head. "Not hungry." He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Do you know what went through my mind when I saw you go under?" She waited, sensing he needed to say this. "I thought I'd found you too late. Again, that I'd waited too long to tell you how I felt, been too careful, too patient." He turned to face her. "I'm done being careful. Isabel, I love you. I've loved you since... I don't even know when it started. Maybe that night I carried you in from the barn. Maybe when you stood up to Henderson about his crooked dealings. Maybe when you danced with me at the festival with your chin high and your eyes blazing." He crossed to her chair, knelt beside it. "I know we said we'd take time, court proper, but today showed me time isn't guaranteed. Floods come, accidents happen, people die with words unsaid." "Cassian?" Her throat was tight with emotion. "I'm not asking you to love me back, not yet. I'm just telling you that I love you, completely, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I needed you to know, in case—" He swallowed. "Just in case." She reached out, framing his face with her hands. This good man. this complicated mixture of strength and gentleness, who'd saved her in more ways than he knew. "I already do," she whispered. "Love you back. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to name it." His eyes widened, hope blooming across his features. "You do?" "How could I not? You've shown me what real love looks like. Not possession or control or meeting society's expectations, but partnership, respect, choosing each other even when it costs something." She smiled through her tears. "Plus, you read poetry and save orphaned calves. How could a girl resist?" He laughed, a sound of pure joy. And then he was kissing her. Not the careful, chaste touches of their courtship, but something deeper, more honest, when they finally pulled apart. Both were breathless. "Marry me," he said. "Not now, not tomorrow, but soon. When you're ready. I want to face whatever storms come knowing you're mine and I'm yours. Legal and proper." "Are you sure?" she asked. "The town gossips will have a field day. The fallen woman and the man who took her in. Let them talk." He stood, pulling her up with him. "We'll be too busy building a life to pay them any mind. Besides," he grinned, "Maeve's already planning the wedding. Has been since the day I brought you home. Might as well make her happy." As if summoned, Maeve appeared in the doorway, trying and failing to look like she hadn't been eavesdropping. "Did I hear something about a wedding?" "Maeve," Isabel exclaimed, laughing. "What, these old ears pick up things?" She bustled in, beaming. "About time, if you ask me. Juan owes me another $5. He bet you'd wait until spring." "Does everyone on this ranch have money on our relationship?" Cassian asked, though he was smiling. "Everyone except Chen Lu," Maeve said. "He said it was undignified to bet on matters of the heart, but he did say he'd make his special dumplings for the wedding feast, so I think he's pleased too." That night, the storm finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming under the stars. Isabel stood on the porch, breathing in the fresh air, when Cassian joined her. "No regrets?" he asked. "About saying yes to a rough cowboy with more cattle than social graces?" She leaned into his solid warmth. "No regrets, though I do have one condition." "Name it." "I keep working after we're married. I like keeping the books, organizing the accounts. I'm good at it." "I'd be a fool to lose the best bookkeeper in the territory," he said. "Besides, someone needs to keep catching Henderson when he tries to cheat us." They stood together, watching the stars reflect in the puddles left by the storm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, wedding plans, town gossip, the endless work of the ranch. But tonight, they had the promise of a shared future, built on mutual respect and love tested by storm and flood. "I should go in," Isabel said eventually. "It's late, and morning comes early." "One more minute," Cassian said, his arms tightening around her. "I nearly lost you today. Let me hold you just a minute more." She understood. The fear was still there, under the joy. The knowledge of how quickly life could change, how precious every moment was. So she stayed, safe in his arms, while the ranch settled into sleep around them. In the morning, she would wake to find the world transformed by the storm. Fences to mend, new channels carved by the flood. The landscape itself altered, but the important things, the people, the animals, the love that bound them all together had survived. And in her room that night, before sleep claimed her, she opened her journal and wrote, "Today I nearly drowned saving a calf. Today Cassian saved me. Today we chose each other, storm and all. It seems fitting. Somehow, our love was born in a storm, tested by flood, and proved stronger than both. Let the gossips talk. We have better things to do with our time, like building a life worth living, one rescued calf at a time." A month had passed since the storm, and the ranch had settled into the quiet rhythm of early winter. Snow dusted the hills like flour, and the air held that crystalline clarity that only came with cold. Isabel stood in the main room, helping Maeve arrange furniture for the evening's gathering. No, the settee goes there, Maeve directed, pointing to the space by the window. We need room for people to move about. This isn't just any evening, it's an announcement party. They'd decided to make their engagement official tonight, inviting the ranch hands and the few townspeople who'd shown them kindness. It was a far cry from the grand parties some couples threw, but it felt right for them. Intimate, honest, surrounded by people who actually wished them well. You're nervous, Rosa observed, watching Isabel smooth her dress for the 10th time. A little, Isabel admitted. She wore a deep green wool dress that Cassian had insisted on ordering from Denver. It feels so official, so final. Having second thoughts? Maeve asked sharply. No, never. It's just... She struggled to find words. 6 months ago, I was left at the altar, homeless, with nothing. Now I'm about to announce my engagement to the most respected rancher in the territory. Sometimes I feel like I'll wake up and find it was all a dream. If it's a dream, we're all having it. Rosa said practically, and Mr. Ward looks at you like you hung the moon. So I think you're safe, as if summoned by his name. Cassian appeared in the doorway. He'd dressed in his best suit, though he'd already loosened his string tie in that way he had when formal clothes made him uncomfortable. His eyes found Isabel immediately, and the smile that crossed his face made her heart skip. Beautiful, he said simply, though you could wear a feed sack and still outshine everyone. Charming as always, Maeve said dryly, though she was smiling. Now go check on Chen Lu's preparations. Man's been cooking since dawn, and he'll have your hide if anything's not perfect. The guests began arriving as the sun set. First came the ranch hands, Juan and his wife Maria, the young cowboys who'd become like brothers to Isabel, old Pete, who managed the horses, then the townspeople who'd shown courage in accepting them the mullers with fresh bread, Dr. Holcomb already sampling the whiskey, the widow Johnson with her 3 children. Even Jake Morrison had made the journey from the Kruger spread, his leg fully healed now. He pumped Cassian's hand enthusiastically. Heard you're making an honest woman of my best bookkeeper, he said with a grin. About time someone recognized her worth. Jake, Isabel hugged him warmly. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it. Besides, he lowered his voice. Wanted to apologize proper-like. If I'd spoken up sooner about the truth of our arrangement, maybe you wouldn't have suffered so much gossip. You couldn't have known, she assured him. And it all led me here, so I can't regret it. The party was in full swing when Cassian called for attention, tapping a spoon against his glass. The room fell silent, faces turning expectantly toward them. Friends, he began, then cleared his throat. That's what you are, friends. You've stood by us when others wouldn't. You've shown that character matters more than gossip. So it's fitting you're the first to hear officially what most of you probably already know. He took Isabel's hand, drawing her to his side. Isabel Carter has agreed to become my wife. We'll be married come spring, and you're all invited to the biggest celebration this ranch has ever seen. Cheers erupted. Glasses were raised. Backs were slapped, and Isabel found herself passed from embrace to embrace. Maria whispered that she'd be honored to help with the dress. Dr. Holcomb declared he'd stay sober for the ceremony. Mostly sober, anyway. Even the children, usually shy, pressed forward to admire her ring, a simple band with a small sapphire that had been Cassian's mother's. A toast, Juan called out. To Mr. Ward and Miss Isabel, proof that good things come to those who wait. And to those brave enough to take in strays, Maeve added with a wink. As the evening progressed, Isabel found herself watching it all with a sense of unreality. This was her life now, these people, this place, this man who stood always within reach, as if he couldn't bear to be too far from her. Happy, Cassian murmured during a quiet moment. Beyond words, she said. Though I keep expecting someone to object, to remind everyone what I am. What you are, he said firmly, is the woman who saved my account books from chaos, who risks herself for helpless creatures, who stands tall no matter what anyone says. That's all that matters. Later, as the party wound down, they walked out to the porch for a moment of quiet. The moon was full, turning the snow-covered landscape into something from a fairy tale. In the distance, a wolf howled, perhaps the same one Cassian had once saved. "Do you ever think about her?" Isabel asked suddenly. "Margaret?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, less than I used to. I think she'd be glad that I found you, that I didn't let bitterness win." He pulled her closer. "Do you think about Thomas?" "Only to be grateful," she said honestly. "If he'd been brave enough to marry me, I'd be Mrs. Whitfield now, trying to make myself small enough to fit his life. Instead, I'm here. I'm myself. I'm yours." "And I'm yours," he echoed, "no matter what storms come." They stood together as guests began to leave, calling out good wishes and promises to help with wedding preparations. Soon, it was just the regular household again, Maeve directing the cleanup, Rosa giggling over something Juan had said, Chen Lu carefully packing away his cooking implements. "I should help," Isabel said, but Cassian caught her hand. "They can manage. There's something I want to show you." He led her to the study, where a large package wrapped in brown paper sat on his desk. "Wedding present," he said. "Early, I know, but I couldn't wait." Inside was a new set of ledgers, bound in the finest leather. Her new name embossed in gold, Isabel Ward, ranch manager. "Manager," she gasped. "You've been doing the job already," he said. "Might as well make it official. Equal partners. Remember in everything." She threw her arms around him, not caring if it was improper. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "Far from it," he laughed. "But I'm yours, flaws and all." As she headed to her room that night, still her room for a few more months, until they were properly married, Isabel reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the rain-soaked church where she'd been abandoned, to the barn where she'd sought shelter, to this warm home where she'd found so much more than safety. Tomorrow, word would spread through town about their engagement. There would be talk. Of course, there always was. Some would say Cassian had lost his mind, marrying a woman with a damaged reputation. Others would whisper that she'd trapped him somehow, played on his sympathy. But here, within these walls, surrounded by people who judged by actions rather than rumors, none of that mattered. She had work that challenged her, friends who valued her, and a man who saw her truly and loved her anyway. She opened her journal, the one Cassian had given her, and began to write. Tonight, we celebrated our future. The room was full of love and laughter and the kind of acceptance I thought I'd never find again. Cassian gave me ledgers with my new name, making me officially what I've already become, his partner in every way that matters. It's strange to think that less than a year ago, I was someone else entirely. A girl trying to please everyone, believing that safety lay in meeting others' expectations. That girl died in a church on a rainy day, and I can't mourn her, because in her place stands a woman who knows her own worth, who's learned that love isn't about possession or meeting society's standards, but about choosing each other day after day. They said I could sleep in the barn as if I were no better than an animal, as if my worth was measured by gossip and lies. Instead, Cassian carried me into his home, into a life I never imagined possible. He didn't just save me from the cold that night. He saved me from a different kind of death, the slow suffocation of a life lived in shame and shadows. Spring will come, and with it, our wedding. A new beginning built on the ashes of an old ending. And when they ask how a ruined woman became mistress of the largest ranch in the territory, I'll tell them the truth. I was never ruined. I was just waiting to be found by someone who could see past the gossip to the person beneath. Let the town talk. We have cattle to tend, books to balance, a life to build, and if another lost soul ever appears at our door, seeking shelter from their own storms, they'll find what I found, a place where your worth isn't measured by whispers, but by the work of your hands and the truth in your heart. Tomorrow is full of promise, but tonight I'm simply grateful for Cassian, for Maeve and Rosa and all our friends, for second chances and the courage to take them, for a love born in a storm and tested by fire. I am no longer the woman who was told she could sleep in the barn. I am Isabel Carter, soon to be Isabel Ward, and I am home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. I'm deeply curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about Isabel and Cassian's journey. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these tales of courage and love from the American frontier. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. Until next time, partners.